Ladies and gentlemen, we have the privilege of talking to a gentleman who is well known amongst his circles as a walking encyclopedia. A man who has a sharp eye to observe an organization's problems and then provide solutions as a management consultant. His work at Hughes Software Systems in the area of quality and HR still generates a loud applause. His acts justify his name, consisting of the two gods. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the management consultant at BizMentor Consultancy Services Private Limited, the very erudite Gautam Brahma. Gautam, people are eager to know what's going on at your end these days.
I'm surprised anybody's interested. Uh, but thank you, Prashant, for including me in this series, where you are covering people from Harrison, HSS. Um, you know, I wasn't sure how I fit into all this because I was there for a short while compared to the others. And in the story of HSS, I'm probably just a footnote, but footnotes can be interesting too, I agree. So these days, I'm having the time of my life. I'm not answerable to anyone. I do what I want. Pretty much taken up in reading and a little bit of writing, some amount of prior commitments on advisory relationships with a few of my older clients, and generally looking forward to dialogue with my grandchildren. I don't want to, get the evil eye on me, but I think these are the best years of my life.
Awesome. But let's rewind back all the way when you were in school. So please tell us about your school days. Were you a bright student? Did you participate in debates? And what all sacrifices did you have to commit as a teenager to join IITs, no less, as you clearly did 2 years before I was born when you joined IIT in 1972?
Uh, you know, I- I'm probably going to disappoint you, but I didn't have much of schooling. I I had only about 8 years of schooling because in my earlier years I lived in places where there was no water or electricity, leave alone schools. So I began schooling the in grade three or class three as they called it then, and I was I was covered in the senior Cambridge examination system, which had just become ISC, so it still had a 11-year schooling board. So I finished in class 11, which means I just did about 8 years of schooling, 8 9 years of schooling. So I didn't have too much. uh, at school I did well. I think I did well in every sense of the word. That school followed the old senior Cambridge assessment, where the highest anybody could ever get were those 5 points, and I was a 5 pointer, so I couldn't have done better. Regarding debating and stuff, I did do that. I was the editor of the school magazine, and debating not too successful. Better in Hindi than in English, because in English, in my time, the neighboring school had a super team. My contemporary there was Karan Thapa, and you can't win a debate with him, right? So, so I did all that, and again, sorry to disappoint you about sacrifices. I mean, I didn't know. I mean, I'm told there was some postal coaching and stuff in those days, but uh, I was probably in the small town. I wasn't really aware of all that. So I didn't have to do much, and it was easy getting into the IIT those days. There were just five of them, and I mean, I didn't see it as a big deal. Uh, so yes, things went well, especially because we had a 6 month holiday. People from the senior Cambridge or the then ISC system followed a January to December calendar. So the board exams happened in December, and wherever else you joined for college, whether it was medical or engineering or whatever, that started in the summer. So all of us used to get a solid 6 month break, and I've never had a break that long and that free of responsibilities ever. So school ended on a good note too. Um, yeah, so that's how it. Talking of school, there's something interesting which I remembered. When I was going over my past, preparing mentally for this discussion with you, it's a strange link between my school days and FSS of electronics. one day I was walking from home. I used to walk to school. And one day I was late for a debate. It was a holiday, but there was a debate happening in school. And I was so late that I started running. And a car stopped, next to me. It was a Fiat, I remember very vividly. And the person said, "What's the matter?" And the person was driving it. I said, "No, I'm getting late for something." So he said, "I'll drop you. Get in." He used to work in ONGC, which had its headquarters next to our school, Tel Bhavan. So when his office came, I said, "I'll get off and run from here." He said, "No, no, I'll drop you all the way." So he dropped me all the way. And in between, he asked me what the debate was all about, what was my position, and so on. And so that's where it ended. Imagine my surprise when 40 years later, I ran into Sanjay Dhawan, who came in as COO in the then FSS Addison. He was the son of that gentleman who had dropped me. I mean, it's so amazing that this strange connection happened. Sorry to please stop me if I sort of old people tend to ramble and drift off in different directions. So please feel free to pull me back on track. So that's where school ended, and I joined the IIT.
Don't worry about it, Gautam. We are enjoying every bit of your, tales, and I'm sure there'll be more of them. But you spent 5 years at IIT studying and mastering physics. Now, instead of using your acquired knowledge in this field of theoretical and applied science, as Karan Thapar would say, you squandered the taxpayers' money and went to IIM Bangalore in 1977. So, why did you take that decision? And if you could rewind the clock, would you still take that decision?
Uh, I think some explanation is in order. Uh, I, of course, enjoyed my stay in the IIT, and it was physics was something I was very fond of. At school, when I was in class 8, one of my uncles, in I don't know what he was thinking or what he was smoking. He did well in class 8, and he gifted me the 3 volumes of Feynman's lectures in physics. Now, Addison Wesley had just brought out the Indian edition, so it was affordable, and I was thrilled. Feynman is the kind of person anybody would be thrilled to know about him. And uh, I never went beyond the first chapter all through my years at school, maybe just first or the second chapter at most. So physics was very much on my radar as something I wanted to do, and I did that in the IIT, and things went well, reasonably well. I finished with an A grade and admission for PhD in 2 universities in the US, which is what. So I ticked all the right boxes. And of course, Delhi was a great place to be in after a small town, and the sights, the sounds, all the excitement. But towards the end, and I thought hard whether I should spin a story or tell you the truth. So I mean, it's easier to tell the truth, because if I spin a story, I might stumble somewhere else. So somewhere towards the end, I became very desperate to do something which will get me a job very quickly, because there was this girl I wanted to spend my time with, and I thought if I'm away for a long time, there were worrying things happening at home, in her home. And so it was in hindsight, it's such an embarrassing thing to say, right? But that's what the truth is. I decided to stay on and uh, do something. So maybe it sounds so different, but uh, you can see me feeling a little self-conscious saying all this. For an old person to say something this silly is hard, but that's the truth. So that's how I gave up. In fact, I remember this gentleman in one of the universities, this faculty member, he was very patient and persistent. He got back to me again in the winter term, before the winter term, and said, "It's still open if you want to come." And I was so grateful to him. His name was very interesting. He was a guy called Professor Ralph Newton. Now just imagine if I had gone there, I would have been working for Newton. But as it happens, it didn't. Uh, so that's how I moved into the IIM. Um, there is another. Okay, this is another interesting digression, which, if you permit me, in the IIT there was this prof. Many of us were very fond of. He's a very nice person, and he had 2 children, 2 sons, and they were they were roughly the same height, and probably, of course, one was older than the other, but they were not very different. And sometimes we had these picnics where faculty members went along with their wives and family and children, and with the students, we used to go somewhere. I think it was Damdama Lake or some such place. And so I used to see these two kids, and they were nice, very well behaved, very polite, and they were always with the father, somehow. And when they went to the mother said, "Go back to your father." So I think I have a fond recall of those two little children. Imagine when I joined HSS, I run into this man, this young man, tall, good looking, very cheerful, a very positive persona, very helpful, good at his work, eager to do anything new, really a gem of a person. And I discovered that it's one of those two children. You know, when I talked to him, I discovered that he was one of those two boys we used to see in these staffs and student picnics. That is Ajay Goyal. So how things sort of connect over a long period of time. So that's a little interesting connection between my days in the IIT and the HSS. Yeah, so that's how it happened. This shift into management. Um, Things happen sometimes.
Cool. I'm sure Ajay's heart would have, warmed up a little bit for, and hearing all this recollection and truly wonderful story. But please tell us about those days at IIM without any internet, computers and landlines, let alone cell phones. Do you think it was a major handicap for learning, or do you think that these days are better? And if you will, please contrast the present times at the IIM with chat GPTs against your own from 1977.
To answer your first question, did I miss the internet and mobile phones? I did not, because I didn't know they existed, right? So, I mean, you miss things only if you're used to them, and we weren't used to it. And forget about mobile phones, even landlines were very difficult to get, and you had to wait for many years to get a landline. When I had to make a call to Delhi or to my parents, I would have to go. I mean, if you're familiar with Bangalore, you have to go to Cubbon Park. Cubbon Park is in the heart of the city, uh, just off MG Road. And there, inside Cubbon Park, there is a telegraph office. There used to be a post office, which was also a telegraph office. And that was a place you could do what was called trunk calls. You had to book a call and wait till your turn came, and then your name would be called out, and you rushed into one of the booths to speak. So there was a lot of planning involved. If you want to make a call to somebody in Delhi or Lucknow or anywhere, you have to plan for it. You have to go there all the way, change two buses and get there. And so that was life. But that's the only life we knew. So we didn't miss anything. I don't think I missed anything. In fact, on the other hand, I mean, I miss some aspects in the current institute, because the batch sizes have become so big that I mean, I would be surprised if anybody in the current batch passing out of IIM Bangalore can name all the batchmates. I'm quite sure they can't. That's a very large number. Whereas I can. The batch size was much smaller, so there was much more camaraderie, if I would put it. So it was not confined to small groups. I think it was in some ways better. And the other advantage of being of those days was the campus was being built, so we were operating of a set of hired buildings, and they were very central in the city. So you could, after classes, you had many more options of activity, let's put it like that, than students would have today. Uh, and Bangalore was heaven. It was green. It was There's very little traffic, and the weather was outstanding. It was really heaven compared to Delhi. Going from Delhi, it just seemed like the perfect place to live in. And the faculty was very friendly. I think because we were a young institute, Calcutta was the oldest. There were only three in those days. So Calcutta was the oldest. Ahmedabad came later, and Bangalore came last. So I think there was a desire to sort of rise up the rankings, so to say, and do well. I have very fond memories of some of my teachers. And there's one particular teacher I'm still in touch with. And I mean, I talk to her almost every week. And, she's become like a family friend. So that's my connection with the IIM. It still stands. I look back to those days with great fondness, actually. So I didn't miss anything. Though when I do go to the campus now, I see it's a beautiful place. The architecture is great. The facilities are wonderful, and they have absorbed good things from the earlier institutes like Ahmedabad. They've carried over the tradition of great architecture from Ahmedabad. Ahmedabad was Louis Kahn who designed their buildings, and they've carried over the hostel design from Calcutta, which had integrated men and women hostels. So that's a very interesting kind of thing. So yeah, it's a wonderful place. I would love to be a student there, but I wouldn't change anything.
Awesome. So you went to IIM for a specific purpose, as you alluded to earlier. So as you came out of IIM, uh, did you succeed in love, and did you
No, no,
get to accomplish
I
your
didn't meet.
ambitions?
I, I I got married as soon as the convocation finished. It was a registrar's office in Jayanagar. I mean, it was like the Special Marriage Act can help you do many things. So anyway, so that's uh, I've had enough embarrassment on that account. So let's move on to other things. So after the IIM, uh, I joined this place called Systems Research Institute, which was a non-profit body set up by a prof from MIT. He taught for 12 years in MIT. Then he was pulled to India by Ravi Mathai, who was setting up IIM Ahmedabad, and he taught in Ahmedabad. And in Ahmedabad, he set up an outstanding, computer studies, department. Um, IIM Ahmedabad had a very unusual kind. I mean, I could talk about that. That's a separate discussion. They had a very unusual and very forward-looking computer lab. And in that, he was helped by one Mr. Narayan Murthy, who was a research associate at Ahmedabad. And J.G. Krishnaya, who's the prof I'm talking about, he, after some years, he left Ahmedabad and came to Pune and set up this SRI with a grant from the Ford Foundation. And Murthy moved in with him, and along with one other person who had just finished his 2-year management program and didn't want to take a job. He wanted to work with this prof. So these two are employees 1 and 2. And SRI went around campuses picking people, and I was picked from Bangalore. So that was my first job. It was a very heady place to be in because those days, computers were the flavor. I mean, it was like people were talking about them. Not many people knew what they did and what one did with them. And this was a think tank set up with a charter of non-traditional applications of computers. So the projects were like, a simulation model for the Indian economy to try policy alternatives and see the impact on poverty and income distributions and all that sort of thing, and health and so on and so forth. And decision support systems for oil rig operators, who have to constantly make a trade-off between speed and feed of the drill bit when they go down, and lots of interesting things like that. So I was there for a while, and yeah, that was my first job. One of the funny thing about the place was Murthy had just left because he himself had got married, and he had left for Patni. But of course, he was there on weekends very often because most of their friends, both Sudha and Narayan Murthy's friends were in Pune. Sudha, incidentally, I knew a bit because Sudha's younger brother was with me in IIT Delhi. He was 1 year junior to me, same course, same hostel. Hostel is very important, for friends. So I knew him, and so of course Sudha Kulkarni, as she was then. So they used to come down in the weekends, and then they stayed in the same place where I stayed because I was staying as a paying guest with with a common friend. So yeah, so that was one thing. And my boss there, I remember very vividly, when I joined SRI, he was a young man himself. He had just come back from the US with an MBA and so on. So he told me frankly, he said, "Look, I don't know how to, I have never supervised anyone." So I said, "That's good because I have never worked. This is my first job, so we are both new to this." and we became good friends. And he went on to eventually get the Magsaysay Award, Deep Joshi, which is, so he became a bit of a celebrity in the non-profit sector. I mean, quite a bit of a celebrity. So I had that wonderful experience of working with some of these people, which incidentally, I mean, we can come back to that later, but I have had extraordinary luck in the people I've worked with. They were all extremely bright, very intelligent, uh, very capable people, and uniformly better than me. I mean, this is, it sounds like a silly thing to say. One would like to work with people who are less, smart, so that you can sort of be top boss. But actually, it's much more fun working with people who are brighter than you. And I've had that extraordinary luck right from my school days. I mean, I had friends who were really extraordinary. And in the IIT, that particular year, the topper of JEE was in our batch. The topper of the CBSE board was in our batch, and so on and so forth. So I had, these people. Uh, it was wonderful. It was a very stimulating thing. Of course, it puts you in your place because you know that you come from a small town, you think you're top dog, but you discover all these other people. So anyway, that was a big digression. So this SRI was a great experience for me, yeah, in many ways. Sorry, I interrupted you. You were
Wonderful.
saying,
No problem. I mean, you're just regaling us, and you're enjoying this interaction. So please keep on narrating all the tales which come to you. And so you clearly you're a fan of SRI, and yet you worked there as a systems analyst for just less than a
very short,
year.
less than a
Yeah.
year. And that was, Deep Joshi left. Deep, my boss, he fell out with Yogi Krishnaya and left. And I was, I felt sort of at a loose end because that was my first job. This is my first boss. It's a small place, and I felt a little lost. And meanwhile, my wife had already taken a sort of a transfer to Bangalore. So I felt that's the place, to be, if you want to be together at any point of time. Getting married is one thing and living together is another. Because she was working in Cochin and I was working in Pune, and that's, if you look at the map, these are quite far apart. So I was looking at that. Again, a funny thing happened there. That's one of the funniest stories, because I have never been able to figure it out. Though I spent, I think, close to 17 years or thereabouts in BEL, I could never figure out how really I got hired. Because she said, you look for a job in Bangalore. So I started looking for a job, and then she said, somewhere, I mean, we were young and crazy, right? So somebody said, some thought came that unless you resign, you will not have a pressure to look for a job. So you won't sharpen your search. And such a silly and stupid thing, and I actually did that. I resigned, and then suddenly it filled me with panic. I have to look for a job in Bangalore. How do you do that? So I got a resume made. Those days, one had to type it out, and then there were these methods of using a cyclostyling machine, which I don't want to waste time describing it to you. It's a very complicated process of duplication before the Xerox machines came. And then how do you get addresses to apply to? So there used to be a Times of India directory, which was a very fat volume. That was, I mean, now with Google and all, you don't need that sort of thing. But that was a kind of a Bible. Companies used to buy the new edition every year. That had a list of all public limited companies, their addresses, what they do, the profile of their top team, and so on. So I picked it up and I looked at all the companies which are in Bangalore, which I could think of, and I sent off applications to them. And this company sort of got back to me. It's a public sector company which hires through ads. I thought it was a joke. I went there and I was hired. And for a couple of years, I didn't even talk about it to anyone because I wasn't sure. There's some confusion, there is some misunderstanding, there is something has gone wrong. And I stayed there for 17 years. I didn't see a single other case like this. There was some mix up somewhere, which I could never figure out. And I didn't dig too hard also because I didn't want to go back, and give up everything. So that's how I landed up in Bangalore. And then, that was a nice period. BEL was a very nice, Bharat Electronics was a very nice experience for me because, and I often wonder, how I stayed on that long. My friends used to say, what are you doing there and there? Because nobody used to go to public sector companies, and they at least thought I was better. I mean, I don't know about that. But I thought that was great because I did such wonderful and interesting work. I still feel excited talking about it. I mean, for example, firstly, it was a very research focused company. There were 16 departments for research and development in different areas of telecommunications, radars, sonars, encryption, and so on. So there were 16, and there were nine component lines of manufacture. So there were R&D groups with each one of those. So they were all put together around 25 R&D groups. Roughly 4% of their revenue was being spent on this. It was very, very hot if you're interested in this kind of work. So, for example, one of my projects was a radar target simulator. So you simulate the behavior of the VM-44, 45 guns on board ships to train radar operators to acquire targets, and lock onto them, so you don't waste gun time in training people. And since we had done this Pokhran nuclear so-called peaceful nuclear explosion, the US had cut off all high technology, exports to India. So this sounds so crazy, but it's true. We actually built a 16-bit computer on 18 large boards, each board about, almost like a foot by 8 inch, 12 by 8 inch PCB, using SSIs and MSIs with 4K of memory, because you don't get anything better. Nothing was available. All high technology exports were stopped. So that computer, when you build that, then you have to write the operating system for that. You have to write some basic compiler. Some compiler, in this case, was a COBOL compiler. A Fortran compiler. And all the programming in assembly language. I don't know if you've ever done anything in assembly language. Just look it up in some Wikipedia. Maybe you'll get some idea. So you actually have op codes, which are hexadecimal codes which tell what is to be done, and the next word is actually the operand on which you work. So working at the level of shift register left by 1 or 2, I think what a crazy thing it was. Anyway, so that was a project. Then there was another one on later, that is later in BL, this a very low frequency receiver for the submarines. Submarines, when they are in water, there's heavy attenuation of RF. So you have to work with very low frequency waves, like talking of wavelengths of the order of kilometers, So you can imagine the dimensions of the antenna which trails the submarine. And you can imagine the ground station which has to transmit to the submarine. So you have antennas which are like a kilometer, a kilometer by kilometer grid of wires for so much energy is being pumped out of Tirunel Valley, where this transmitter was, that if you walk with a tube light, tube light would glow. And so you're supposed to carry no metal objects with you. Anyway, so I don't want to go ahead on this. Frequency hopping radios to avoid, detection and decryption. I did a lot of interesting work there. And plus, I was rotated across departments. So I was in a group which was setting up when I joined, they had two factories, 2 locations. And by the time I left, they had 7. So they had, projects for new project plans, project reports for new facilities. We almost set up a facility in Iraq, but then the political situation changed and that didn't happen. So it was, I think, a good period for me. And incidentally, again, there's a connection with HSS. When I last left, I was sort of heading an R&D kind of a group. It was called D&D, Development and Engineering. There were two of my teammates who I found had joined HSS. So I found Rakesh Mattu and Prabhat Sahu. Prabhat Sahu didn't come directly. I think he went to do a course in management in, IIT Kharagpur, the Vinod Gupta School of Management. That's where he came from. And Rakesh Mattu also went somewhere else and came. So when I came here, it was like, wonderful. I have 2 people I know already, and they were both gems. I mean, I don't know if you know any of them. I don't know when you joined, and Prabhat you might have met. Maybe Rakesh you may not have met. So they were wonderful engineers in BL, and they were great in HSS as well. And I felt quite proud to see them do so well. And Rakesh Mattu sort of, I remember, both of them were sort of very, took a lot of care to sort of make me settle down. I remember Rakesh Mattu when I was making my first trip to HNS. Uh, he came over and said, "Have you been there before?" I said, "No." Then he gave me a very detailed, you know, set of guidelines on how to, go about the travel and so on. And it's a case of a very young person, educating his boss, in something. I really liked that part. And here again, there's another funny one. This is really funny. So when I was one of these Diwali parties in HSS, where families came, right? You could bring your spouse and you could bring your parents if you so desired. So I was going to this, we were walking around, me and my wife, and we ran into friends from Chandigarh, who was, that was the gentleman was in the army, and he was in the army when I was in Panchkula as part of BEL. And he saw me and he said, "What are you doing here?" So I said, "I work here." And I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "My daughter works here." He said, "Wow." And I remembered his daughter as, a little girl, two little girls they had, wearing frocks, sitting, I mean, when they came to our house, their legs wouldn't touch the, uh, ground and sitting on. I said, "What are you saying?" He says, "Yes, she's," and I said, "But when did she join?" He told me. And I said, "How come she's never met me? How come she's never, I'm very much in the same facility." So he said, "I don't know." And then we guessed that probably she was too embarrassed. If she runs into me, I might call her by her, you know, her family pet name or something, because I would, but I was very careful when I interacted with her later. I was very careful. I never let on this fact that I had, seen her as a little child in frocks. Uh, but I think I can now tell you, and if she's watching, I can say, "Well, Priyanka Sachar, I never let you down," right? So that was, HSS had some connects like that in my past life. HSS itself was, of course, but I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. You were saying you may have something to ask.
A big shout out to Priyanka Sachar out here, and this is nothing short of a scandal, Gautam. So it's a big scoop.
Oh, I didn't share
But
the name. I didn't share the name, right?
you did share the name.
Not the pet name, not the pet name, not the family name.
Go for it.
No, it's okay. Let me. She's a grown up.
Okay. We'll find out. But you worked at Bharat Electronics, which has been the India's premier firm involved in cutting edge tech for defense sector, amongst other things. And you worked there for 17 years, no less. Interestingly, the first disinvestment of 20% of this public sector firm and listing of the Bharat Electronics shares in the Bangalore and Mumbai stock exchanges took place in the year 1992. And at that point of time, if my calculations are right, you were nearly 13 to 14 years into the organization. So, did you get any stock as part of this disinvestment?
No, this was not a practice in public sector companies. This was not a practice. Even now, it's not a practice in most companies. It's only in the IT companies that we have this. In many of these brick and mortar companies, don't have a practice of handing out stock, except to maybe very few people. In public sector, it's not there at all. It wasn't there at all. I don't know if it's there now. In any case, here is another cringe-worthy sort of admission. I'm not a investor. I'm not an equity player. I'm not good at it. So I don't do that. I don't have any shares of BEL or any other company for that matter. The only shares I had were those of HSS, which, you know, were sort of awarded to me in a way, right? So I am not the right person to answer this. But BEL has done well, and I'm so happy for them because the interesting thing about Bharat Electronics is it was set up in 55, if I'm not mistaken, 55 or 56. And from the first year of operation, it was making profits and giving a dividend to the government. I know people say, well, public sector companies have, price advantages and so on. But there are so many public sector companies which are completely sick and loss making. So it's not true. I think there is something to be said about the culture in Bharat Electronics. I'm very proud of being part of that, having been part of that company. And that pride started the moment I first met the MD, the CMD. So as part of the ritual of joining, I had to go and meet him. And so I walked in, and there was this large room, and there was a small table, relatively small table in one end. And this man sitting there was wearing a what was those days called a bush shirt. I don't know if you are familiar with the term. It's a shirt which has short sleeves and and pockets here, and which is not worn tucked in. It is outside the trousers. So he's wearing that, and a very unassuming fellow. And as I approached his table, I saw the bookshelf behind him. And what were the books behind him? There was nothing on management. There was this big handbook. I don't know if you were electronics, you might remember radar engineering handbook by Skolnick, which was like a Bible for people who are doing electronics engineering development for radars and stuff of that sort. So I thought, this is the place. This is the wonderful place. This guy is not, he's not, he's a regular guy. So it was a very engineering focused company, and it was one company which never, I mean, okay, so I don't know if what is the status right now, but till when I last checked, it has never ever had a bureaucrat heading it. No deputy from the IAS cadre or something. It has always had engineers, you know, mostly grown from within, or if they've come from outside, they were hardcore engineers. So that defines the culture of the place, right? You can't bullshit management there with on some of these things, because they've all done it and they're very familiar. So I like that place. I really liked it. It was in Bangalore, and then there was this Operation Blue Star, and after that things became very troubled in Punjab, Haryana, that this part of the country. And BL was setting up a plant there, and nobody would want to go, because they were finding it difficult. So they asked for volunteers, and they said, we'll give you secure housing and stuff like that, whatever. So I had lost my mother, and my mother actually died very early. She was only 49 when she died, and that was quite a traumatic period. In that, I wanted to be close to my father in Lucknow, and I thought that would be a better place to be in. So I moved there, and that was also interesting because that was a time when you had checkposts all over, and there are so many types of paramilitary organizations, including the Tamil Nadu Special Police. Can you imagine? Chandigarh had Chandigarh Police, it had the Punjab Police, it had the Punjab Armed Police, it had the Haryana Police, it had the Haryana Armed Police, it had the Tamil Nadu Special Police, which was supposed to guard the governor's house, because the idea probably was that people from there would have no local links, and it was crazy to driving around, being stopped every now and then. But that was a nice experience, setting up, being part of something being set up from the ground up, and one got to do a lot of interesting things there. Yeah.
Sure, awesome. And in 1996, you left Bharat Electronics
Yep.
for good after an impressive stint of 17 years and joined the Institute of Quality. So please tell us what triggered that transition and what the Institute of Quality was all about as an organization to attract you from all that you described at Bharat Electronics.
So my kids were growing up, and I think there's a little bit which I have not talked about my life, which was not a very pleasant thing. The first 15 years of my work life, apart from whatever else was happening, there was a series of family medical crises and tragedies and so on. My son, both of my kids had near death, situations, and the elder one, of course, was. For all practical purposes, for most of us, we thought he's gone. A major accident. So I was keen to move to Delhi for nothing else, to be closer to a better set of medical, facilities. Especially because my father was with me, had also had a series of strokes. So I don't want to get into that messy thing. The family situation required me to be in a place where I would have better access to better facilities, and also some support, because my wife's family lived in Delhi. So I thought, in case of, it's a mixed thing. So I was driven by a lot of things which were totally, as you must have seen in my life story so far, I have never been it hasn't been one of carefully plotting a 5-year plan and making all the right moves. is driven by impulse, by emotions, and by circumstances which are anything but professional. So that's how I landed up in Delhi. And I had a former colleague who had left PEL and joined this place. IQL was a body set up by four people, three of whom were promoters of NIIT. And the fourth was a person who was from another industry. And they wanted to set up something which would provide quality related training and consulting. And they were all very impressed by a gentleman called Philip Crosby, who was a writer, educator, consultant in the area of quality. One of his famous books is Quality is Free. It was a bit of a bestseller in those days. So Philip Crosby liked what they were doing, and he also invested in the company. So this was a company which was meant to provide quality education and quality consulting. And they tied up with another person called Robert Camp. Again, people from logistics would probably relate to that name. He was a kind of a logistics manager for Xerox in the US, who came up with this idea of benchmarking, process benchmarking. He wrote a definitive book on it, how companies can learn from other companies to improve their processes, even if those processes are very different. So, for instance, how you can learn from the way main turnaround is done in the pit in the F1 races. The car comes in, the wheels are changed, the windscreen is cleaned, a lot of things are done in a very, very short time, including giving a soda to the driver if he wants one. So all that, and the tank is filled, the tires are changed, the windscreen is cleaned, and a soda is given to the driver, all within less than a minute, much less than a minute. So how you can learn from that to increase the turnaround time in car rental handouts, so stuff like that, and how you can learn from that to speed up check-ins at hotels. So I'm just giving you a very kind of a crude example, but there are lots of other interesting sort of parallels you can draw from one business process in one company to another business process in another company, apparently very different, if you look at it the right way and abstract out the essentials. So I was closely associated with Robert Camp, and we set up a benchmarking center in IQL, and we had I think 200 members I enrolled from different companies as members. So yeah, that was an interesting period, 2.5 years, and right, 2.5 or 3 maybe, I don't know, I forget I didn't prepare well, so please excuse me for the dates part of it. So yeah, that was an interesting work, and that was my first experience in another way. I worked for the first time with somebody who was a boss, let's say, who was younger than me. So that was in a way, a preparation for HSS. And so he was from my college, but younger. While I had spent my time in the wilderness of the public sector, he had moved in a different way because he stayed in the private sector in metropolis cities. So my first reaction was, how will I work with somebody who's so much younger? But actually, it was wonderful because the discomfort was equally on the other side, and I realized that. And I think I can't speak for him, but I can speak for myself. It was a fantastic learning experience. He was such a bright person. I'm still in touch with him. And I was, in fact, quite touched when he wrote his first book and he asked me to sort of go through the draft and give comments. And I felt very good about it. And I learned a lot from him. In fact, much of what I later did in my consulting work was influenced significantly by his approach to getting the larger picture right and getting the detailing to the right level. I found it it was a great learning experience for me, especially after all those days. And there's a funny thing here also. I don't know how much we interacted in HSS, but some people commented in HSS about me always wearing a white shirt and dark trousers. And, I just sort of passed it off, though I did share the truth with some people. I think I told Adesh, I don't know. I told a few people. So the story begins in IQL, actually. What happened was when I joined IQL, after I was hired and so on, my boss tells me that, we have a dress code in the company, so you should just know that. I said, what is it? He said, it's white shirts and dark trousers, so preferably with a tie. So I said, okay. I didn't have any white shirts at all, at all. So this is something I last wore in school, so I never had white shirts. So I went out and got some, 6, 7, 8, I don't know, a large number of white shirts, enough for the week. And then when I got those, then I just kept on getting more white shirts because you keep needing them, right? I mean, white gets, faded very quickly. And then my wife saw that she likes white, she started gifting me white shirts. And had a lot of white shirts. And I started noticing that sometimes there are other people in the office who don't wear white. So I thought, well, maybe they're close to the boss, or maybe they've been around for long, and whatever, or maybe they're just violating the guideline. It's not right of them. Till one day I found my boss wearing a light colored shirt, which is not white. So I said, well, he's the boss, so he can do anything. Then one of the offsites for some planning or whatever, it was outside the office. After a few drinks, he asked me, he said, can I ask you one thing? I said, yeah, sure. He said, why do you always wear a white shirt? I said, you told me when I joined, the day I joined, you said you should wear white shirts and dark trousers. So he said, I never said that. I said light shirts. So I'm a little hard of hearing. I mean, I know that. So I just heard it as white. This is a silly, stupid, life is full of stupid things like this. Anyway, so I have continued to do that. Even now, I mean, you can see me wearing white. It's a work day, so I'm wearing white, white shirts. Okay, so this is one of those funny things. Yeah, so that is where IQL was. And IQL led me to HSS in a very interesting way. Or should I wait for you to ask me that question?
Well, I'm sure you must be having an array of white colored shirts, but what about the black sweater or the dark gray sweaters? What's the story behind that?
No, there's no story there. It's just that, you know, that's just one of those things. I have no explanation for that. White and black became the color. So black or dark.
People were really, really curious. And in fact, I got special requests to ask you specifically your,
Especially why
attachment
this
to
guy
this
dresses
dress
like
code.
an accountant. Why this guy dresses like an accountant?
Yeah, I remember that interview as well, where, you know, I believe it was Kriti who was
Yeah,
describing
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yeah, but then your glorious innings began in HSS in October 1998. So I believe you were paratrooped into HSS specifically for preparing the organization to achieve the CMMI, or Capability Maturity Model Integration certification. The ISO 9000s were, of course, a minor hurdle on the way. So please tell us who pulled you in, how it happened, and how was your initial interaction with the PMD Arun Kumar and the glorious trio of Sam, Sood, Mao, and Adesh.
So the firstly, small correction. It was not CMMI. It was just CMM those days. CMMI came later. So that's a very minor nitpicking. So as part of my work in IQL, when I was started working with Robert Camp, one of the things we did was to do public workshops, where you know, people paid to attend. I used to do these 2-day workshops where people from different industries would come in. Hard to believe, but yes, I did that. Anyway, so one of those workshops, there was this guy from a company called TV18. TV18 was a media company, which was later, through acquisitions and mergers, it's changed. But so there was this person there, a manager from that company, who attended the workshop. Later on, he said, "Can you come over to our company, make a visit, and maybe you can tell us a few things. Can you give some suggestions and so on?" So I spent some time with him. I went across. That was a great experience too, because I'd never been into a TV company earlier, and everybody was sort of looked like a 16 to 18-year-old. Everybody dressed, very in a very wild manner. As we walked into a kind of a college fest or something. Anyway, so this person, he talked to me, and later on, I tried to call him, and I discovered that he had left the company. So he rang me up and said, I have joined Hughes Software, a company in Gurgaon, and so I wanted you to come and give a talk on benchmarking, like the one you did in our company and so on. I said, sure. And I went across and I almost didn't go because I drove down to the plot 31 facility, and on Sikandarpur, in those days, this road was not what it is today. It was a narrow bridge which you had to cross over the Nala. And I had a puncture there, I had a flat tire, and it was a rainy day. It was very messy. And I thought, what the hell, let me just call it off. But I couldn't connect. I had my mobile phone. So those days, there were these giant mobile phones, which were more like TV remotes, nothing sort of connected. So I got my puncture repaired, reached late, and I found that people had already left, and then they had to be reassembled. And I was very embarrassed that I have all these people. And I found in the boardroom there were all kinds of people. I later discovered that was the entire set of people who reported into uh, either directly to Arun or to the SAM, right? So there was a whole lot of people there. And so I gave my usual presentation on benchmarking, and they had a few questions, and I answered them. And then, as people were filing out, the two people who lingered to speak to me were not one of these people who are the senior, management, so to say. One was this young girl, Anupma, and the other one was a equally slightly older person, Rajesh Pandey. So Anupma Babbar and Rajesh Pandey talked to me a bit, and Rajesh Pandey talked to me a lot. And he kept on asking me for more details about myself, and I was wondering why. I mean, I don't know why is he asking me all these questions. Anyway, I answered whatever, then I went back. But I realized later that this was some sort of a quick, because a kind of a group, a sensing by the group of whether this kind of a person is going to fit into HSS or not. And so then I got a formal call from one of these, placement companies which they retained, and which caused some amusement, because the person who called me um, was a lady whose name was exactly the same as my wife's. So the telephone operator said, where have you been? Your wife is looking for you. She's on the phone. Pick it up from the nearest phone here. So I picked up the call, and it sounded somebody different. Anyway, so there's some confusion there. Anyway, so she said, these people are interested. So can you show up? Can you talk to them? Like, she's explained what the company does and so on, what they plan to do, the usual stuff. Then I came and met all these three people and Arun, and that's how it happened. It was very unusual in some ways. Plot 31, I remember very vividly. I was very impressed by plot 31 because, when I walked in, the first thing I saw was the ATM. That somehow impressed me a lot because it was such a pain, going all over the place looking for ATMs to withdraw cash. So, yeah, that's how it happened. And then CMM, I did a few other things too, but CMM, yes, that was the main focus. And it was really, uh, honestly, I think it was more because GP Nair was getting very busy with his spaceway and other things. And GP Nair was looking after quality in addition to whatever else he was doing. And Satya was sort of, the full-time person. And they wanted somebody more full-time. And GP was wanting to move on to do more of what was his core responsibility. That's how I see it. Uh, I thought it'll be a very difficult thing to do, but it was actually not so, because, and that's very interesting. I mean, somewhere, I think in Jairam Iswaran's dialogue with you, he mentioned that uh, the way the company saw HR was that it is every manager's responsibility. Every manager has to be a HR manager, and not treat that responsibility as something belonging to a function or department. The same thing was true for quality. I think the way Vinod had visualized work in HSS was that every manager is responsible. It's not as if managers do their work, whatever it is, and then somebody else comes in to do a quality work. So the uh, it was actually much simpler than it is usually is in other companies, because of the tremendous involvement and support of the top management, especially Vinod. and the fact that the quality of the managers was outstanding. I mean, it's common for people to say these things about companies that it's more like saying, but you have to trust me when I say it because I have nothing to gain or or lose by telling the truth. I'm at a different stage of life. It's genuinely true. I didn't see anybody who was incompetent. I mean, the managers were very good, and the kind of selection process the company had was such that it ensured you know a high level of capability. And capable people want to deliver quality. I mean, it's not as if um, it's much simpler with them. Of course, the challenge sometimes is that they don't see value in paperwork or the process because it sort of holds them back sometimes from what they want to do faster. So there is that bit, which is an easier problem to tackle than a case where people are incompetent or mediocre and lethargic, resistant to change. So it's a different problem. In any case, processes are written for the average person. Outstanding people don't probably need something which is very restrictive. So I didn't see it as I mean, I had worked on the ISO 9000. BEL was one of the first companies. It's not the first, I know. The first was Sundaram Fasteners, but it was one of the first companies to have an ISO 9000 certification. In fact, those days we didn't have SSS, so we flew in the SSS from UK. So it was that difficult. So I was familiar with the challenges of implementing of something like this, but I found it was much less in and let's not forget, I was there largely to support Satya. Satya was a class of his own. I mean, I was in awe of him. I'll tell you, till I met Satya, I hadn't met anybody personally. I mean, of course, I'd read and knew of people, but I hadn't met anybody personally who actually had created some sort of an algorithm, a piece of software, which he had copyrighted and got some earning out of it personally. So this is something many people don't know about Satya. He had actually, even before joining HSS, he had done this. And I think it was jointly done by he and Anita, who's his wife. I could be wrong there, but so I was quite stunned, because here is a man, who's actually done something which he has sort of so I mean he's given as a kind of a copyrighted it, and people who using it are paying him for it. So I mean, he was really an outstanding professional, very good and very methodical, and it was such a pleasure working with him. So yeah, and the team, I mean, the kind of assessors we built for the final assessment, that team, I mean, you name it, they were there. I mean, what you couldn't ask for better people, very senior people, very capable people who had actually led a large variety of projects, was spared by Vinod to be part of the assessment team. And that's not something which happens in many companies. People who have nothing to do are put aside for this kind of work. So it was when you have this kind of commitment from management. I mean, as I said, I I don't want to say more because I don't want them to take back my salary and so on. But I found that my role was quite, let's put it like that, easy. So
Well, you call it easy, but I'm sure you must have met your challenges. But apart from the QoS work, that is the quality management system at HSS, you were also involved in a cocktail of other work. To name a few: procurement and admin,
yeah, so
HR.
that happened in a strange way. I mean, maybe there was a plan to it. I don't know. Maybe Adesh had something in mind. But one day Adesh called me and said that no, of course, one part of involvement was like every senior person was involved in some amount of training, right? I mean, uh, orientation training for freshers joining and so on. So I was uh, doing some of that stuff. One day it tells me that there is a national conference being organized by the National HRD Network on what was it? I think it was computer aided education, online learning, or some such thing. I forget the exact phrase, but it was basically learning other than in the classroom, right? So he said that they have asked me, that is Adesh, to be the technical sort of resource to be able to sort of devise the what should be done in the conference and what should be the themes to be discussed and who should be talking about what and stuff like that. Someone who's more familiar with. I said I'm not familiar with. So he said he's busy, and can I take on that? Somebody in the company should do that. He was being asked, but he was busy, so he said, "Why don't you do it?" So I said, "Fine, it's interesting. Looks interesting." So I read up a bit about the subject, and I got in touch with who are the people in India and overseas. Overseas people couldn't come, so I got some of them to record their talk and send it across by courier in those small cassettes. Which anyway, so and of course, located people in other companies like Infosys and TCS and so on invited. So there was got involved. Then I got involved with the National HRD network, and then I met some interesting people there, and I got interested in HR somewhat, and I started writing a monthly column in a magazine and continued to do that for 20 years. I wrote 20 years of monthly columns on HR. I mean, just all arising from something like this. Anyway, so then Adesh, of course, was pulled out to start this other line of business, as you know, the BPO, which we set up. So somebody had to be hired to run HR. So I was told to look after HR and participate aggressively in the hiring of a person. And I can tell you I was quite aggressive on that in my own way because I wanted to, but it took a couple of years, I think. And finally, we interviewed a lot of people. Finally, we took on, as you know, Jairam Iswaran. So that's when I relinquished HR. But by the time I had sort of got deep into the other activities, so I continued writing those columns and stuff like that, and continued to be part of the National HRD network. And they had a lot of their initiatives like Beyond Business, which was supposed to connect with non-profits and so on. I edited some of their work. Anyway, so that was the association with HR. And I think it was very interesting. And I have to thank Adesh for that, really. Just like I have to thank Vinod for the CMM. I really have to thank Adesh for pulling me into this. And looking after HR and HSS uh, was a nothing job, because look at who were the people who were in my team. So you had Anupma Babbar, right? You had Fazal, you had Pankaj Bansal, you had Sandeep Kumar looking after the the operations, Indrajit Sen. I mean, I could, for on each one of them I can talk for at least 15-20 minutes non-stop. I mean, I mean, look at how they have gone after that. Look at what they have done after that. Each one that, I mean, Adesh had built a team of Navratna. It was a really a star-studded team. They didn't need any minute supervision. Probably just needed somebody to talk to once in a while. They were very, very self-driven, very capable people. Look at Pankaj. What has he done? I mean, I don't know if you've tracked his career. His trajectory. Uh, it's remarkable. It's been a remarkable. Look at Anupma. So all of the people who were in Adesh's team were individual gems. They were actually much bigger than the role they were being assigned. Just to take a small example, I didn't know enough about them, although they were in the company. It's only when I joined, I mean, as the head of HR, take anyone, take Indrajit Sen. I just want to take it as an example. I didn't know that he had this long career in sales, where he also did sales training for new salespeople, and he had actually trained people like Payal in the classroom. Payal and the other gentleman who we had in Dubai, what's his name? Do you remember the person who uh, that
In
young
Dubai.
Middle East used to look after that side? Anyway, so he had actually trained them in sales. I mean, given sales training to them. I didn't know that he's a licensed commentator on football matches. So any Durand Cup match or anything, he was on the panel. He could be called and to give the commentary on football. I didn't know that he was one of those three original, professionals families who moved from Calcutta to Delhi when Delhi was became the capital of the country. And that there's a road in Old Delhi, a very prominent road named after his grandfather. Such a unassuming, I mean, a person won't, I wouldn't have known all this if I hadn't worked with him, right? They are all very special people. As I said, I told you before, I have had this extreme good luck. People keep complaining about toxic colleagues and toxic bosses and stuff like that. I've had a charmed life. Thank God for that. So that was a lovely experience. There were some tough patches, of course, in between, as you can imagine. There was a period when um, how did I forget Jayati? Jayati Talapatra, such a young girl, and she was doing this campus engagement. What energy, what ideas she was, and look at what she's doing now. I mean, she's a prof in Terry University. She's a prof in Terry University and an advisor to MNCs on sustainability. Adesh's team has gone places, and I think he should be. I'm sure he is proud of it, and I think they should thank him for the kind of grooming and the kind of opportunities to grow that he gave each one of them. It was wonderful being part of that. Prashant, are you doing a good job of holding me back when I go off the tracks? Please do that
We're
because
just loving it. We are loving it. I mean, I don't know whether I'm doing any job at all over here. You're just regaling us with those pearls. So pray continue. But I have a question to ask. When you became the CHRO at HSS Stroke Flextronics, did you change anything immediately which was off track in the organization, or did you introduce anything new which was missing?
I'll have to think hard. I mean, if I say that I approved suggestions which came from Pankaj for training, or from Indrajit for recruitment, or from Anupma for OD, well, I could say that, but to give the devil his due, I mean, I was more like a sounding board and more like a enabler for whatever they had come up with, and they were always coming up with something new. I mean, let's give an example. Let's say Jayati wanted to take an SS7 license and give it to an engineering college you know in Delhi, so that they could play with it. They could play with that stack, build things around it, and that would create an engagement. And so, did I conceive of it originally? No, but did I help her flesh it out and so on? Maybe yes. And all the compensation related structures, did I create them? No, but did when they came to me from Indrajit and other people, did I help them think it through and maybe make them better? Yes. So I think it's more of that kind of work. So as you can imagine, it was the second role which I was holding. It's for the others to say whether they saw anything new, and maybe for the others to talk about it. But Pankaj, for example, was always coming up with something new on how training should be done, and what to do. Always. He so I was a sounding board for ideas, maybe, and I was also some sort of a filter. I was some sort of a gatekeeper. You know, sounds terrible, but that's the truth. People can often take credit for whatever their juniors have done, and I'll tell you, just on a lighter vein, we had a situation in HSS. Now, I won't tell you any names on this, so you can't push me on this. We had one person appear going for an interview, and he found his boss coming in for the same interview for the same position, and the people who interviewed them were seeing the same set of achievements, right? Because I mean, did you? It's very difficult for interviewers sometimes to disentangle what the boss did and what the junior did, and whether any of them did anything at all. So yeah, so I mean, this is not a straight answer to your question. The straight answer probably is no. There was some development of an approach. So for example, let me give you another example. Anupma had made some sort of a approach on how the integration, a cultural integration would happen when we acquired the facility, Lucent's facility in Nuremberg. Now, it so happened that I was part of the group which went for that discussion, which the first discussion which didn't work out. So I had to look at that plan, and I had to make some changes. I had to sort of recast it because whatever it was, I was going to be talking about it. So yeah, I mean, if you look at these cosmetic things, yes, I don't have any great original, absolutely novel, um, out of the box contribution to HR in that period.
But I think you're just playing it down, I must say. And let me ask you a specific instance. So when Flextronics acquired FutureSoft, you went to Chennai for a few months to manage the new development center with its marquee product, the intelligent switching system, the ISS, which became really a jewel in the crown of HSS. So how was your experience working in Chennai with a team which had just been merged into the organization, the kind of insecurities or the kind of aspirations which they had, and how did you deal with them?
So, firstly, it was for a year. It was sort of it was an open-ended position. It was for a year. It may have dragged on beyond that also. It's just that things happened, and we can talk about what happened, which sort of cut short and made me come back after a year. So that was Mao's idea, and just like I mentioned, that whatever happened in CMMI or CMM first and CMMI later was really Vinod's, baby. And whatever I happened in HR with my career was Adesh's initiative. So similarly, this was completely Mao. I had gone for dinner one night, and he rang me up and said, can you come out and talk for a while? And I said, yes. And he said, no, yes, I want you to go to Chennai. I said, it was a bolt from the blue. I didn't have any. So I said, but I gave him some other names, and he said, no, we can't spare that. We can't spare. You have to. So he said, yeah, you can come back. You can come every 2 weeks for a weekend and so on and so on. So I said, fine. I went there, and it was a very, it was a great experience, but it was also one of the most stressful things in my life because I have generally not been a, I mean, some people may not like me much or whatever, but I've not been hated. I didn't get a feeling of being disliked, ever, whether in school or college or later in the IIM or my jobs earlier. But I got a very strong feeling of being totally unwanted and disliked there. Just to give you an example, I would go to the cafeteria to eat, and there are tables with 4, 5 people eating, and they're talking and so on. And I have to sit somewhere. So there's a lot of space there. So I sit at the other corner. Suddenly, all conversation ends, you know, and people get off and leave quickly. And nobody comes on that table, though there is, crowding on the others. So just a small example. I felt completely unwanted, and I was the only person from the acquiring company, in a sense, right? Everybody else had grown up in that company, the seniors, and the people who had been hired by those seniors and so on. So uh, it was very, very stressful to find, yourself not being so. Unless you call for a meeting, nobody sort of comes to you for anything, and whenever they do this, they don't open up and talk freely, and they just don't want to interact with you after office hours. It was all, that's how it started, and it was, I didn't know whether it would, how it would pan out. But, time is a big enabler and so many things. And people talk to me, and I think they found that this guy at least is not threatening in any way and probably is there to help in some way. And, what had made it worse was that the person who set it up, and that's again an interesting story, which is, you heard it from, I think, was it Mao or somebody must have mentioned in this, that a gentleman who was on our board, FutureSoft founder and chairman, was actually a member of the HSS board at one time, Mr. Ramni. And then his company was acquired. So his immediate reportees had left. So we had the second level people, and these people had not really, in a small company, is the top person in the immediate C-suite who really run the show. People at the second level, however smart they may be, they don't have that breadth, or in some sense that experience of managing the total responsibility. So they were also sort of feeling lost, right? If you're in a company, if I am in a company reporting to Adesh, let's say Adesh reports to Arun and so on, and Arun goes and Adesh goes, and I'm a totally new person comes in. I'm suddenly, I can understand their discomfort, and I had to sort of absorb some of that angst, and so it was hard. And we wanted to integrate them completely, the admin with the admin, the HR with the HR, the engineering with the engineering, so on, quality with that, and everybody had very definite ideas of what they'd been doing all these years. So it was stressful, but um, we moved ahead. And I think when they saw that good things were being done by the company, they were working out of a little cramped office. So we actually company hired a totally new modern facility, and they saw growth happening. The size increased significantly, even in 1 year. Uh, I think that softened some of the, but the second level, most of the people did leave eventually. But the third level uh, took over, and I think it became much better integrated. One of the things I did there was because I had time, I went through the personal files of all the employees, and that was a learning for me. The profile of the people there was very different from the profile of the people in HSS up north. They were from a much more diverse background, and it was very sort of encouraging. It was a good addition to the. It was a good complement to whatever we had. Apart from other fact that they work closer to Silicon, right? I mean, their work was it fitted very well with whatever was happening. Yeah, so that was a stressful period. Plus being away, and during that period, terrible things happened. There was the famous flood of Chennai when everything got drowned, and the people got stuck in the offices. They couldn't go back, and they couldn't be evicted. I remember one of the HR ladies and another guy from HR. They had to spend the night. Two, three of them had to spend the night in the office because there's no way to get out. There's water everywhere. And the next day, also, some kind of a truck was brought with a ladder to sort of help them down. And then my office caught fire. So the funny thing which happened, it was reduced to ashes. There was some kind of electric short circuit, and then that had to be redone. A whole lot of strange things happened when I was there. Uh, and then, of course, I left, which was there was there were some changes which happened. There was this, the Flextronics had taken over, and they had brought in Sanjay Dhawan, who would eventually take over the role as a COO. And when he visited Chennai, he sort of liked what he saw, and he said, "I want to handle it directly from here and onwards. I want to look at this unit should be all the people should report to me directly." I mean, something he liked what he saw, and so he wanted to take charge of it. After I had sort of shown him around and done whatever briefing I could do, he really liked the place, and so it became clear that there wasn't any role for me there, and that was also the time Arun passed away. So so I asked for a shift back, and that's how I returned after a year. But it was a very interesting experience. I wouldn't call it an unqualified success because we didn't actually shift into the new facility when it was identified. It was contract was signed. The interiors were significantly completed, but the shift didn't happen, and that was a very important thing. Shifting people to the new premises to give them the feel of how this company views the workspace, and to convince people that there is a long term, there's a future for them in the company, that there is a provision for growth, that we mean business. We're not here for it's not a passing sort of engagement. So yeah, I I have mixed feelings about my stay in Chennai because I would have liked to see a completion of some of the things we started. But eventually things worked out. I did go back when they got the CMM I certification I was present when that event happened. And I was so happy to see all those people in their new offices. Mm.
Awesome. Thanks for telling us the story because I get a feeling that often you don't get credit for such an achievement, and people know you for quality and HR, but Looks like a lot of people might have missed this story, so I'm glad you told us all this.
Achievement is a very strong word to use for it. I mean, it had to be done. Somebody had to be a buffer for a while till all this plays out, and all the functions plug into their respective counterparts in the corporate office. And that was a I think that was the job which I was supposed to do. And to make it a little more complicated, there was another entity they have called eMused, which had an office in I think it had it in Pondicherry in Oroville. They were also plugging into. I mean, they were okay. So here is this thing. Like in the roughly 9.5 years I was at HSS, FSS, Addison put together. I had a list and I was trying to look for it and I couldn't find it. Maybe I've cleaned up my papers a lot. And so there were, I think, 11 or 12 entities which were integrated into the original HSS in that period, which is a lot. Some of them are very small, like ASCOM and all, which are hardly 4 or 5 people, I think. But some of them are big, like FutureSoft, Decanet. They were bigger operations. So think of it. Think of the challenge for the HSS management. On the one hand, there is rapid growth in numbers and attrition, which means it's a huge challenge of keeping things going without any break and keeping the culture intact. On top of it, you have these 11 entities being merged with all their ego problems and preconceptions and misgivings and cultural differences. And while all this is happening, you are acquired thrice, right? You go to one, then to the second, then to the third. So it was a very stressful period for the top team, in which I mean, of course, Arun and you know uh, Vinod and Adesh and Mao, and for many other people also. So I give full credit to them. It was very difficult. I mean, and many of these things were not of their choice, right? When Electronics has acquired you, and they say, well, we acquired these companies as well, and now they're going to be part of you. It's a fiat, it's a diktat, right? And they rose up to it, and with all the struggle, I think eventually things did work out. In fact, after I left, there were two more entities which were absorbed. So I think the list went on. So, but again, this was a digression. So you were saying something about achievement. I mentioned this is achievement, which is an achievement of sorts because I didn't stay to complete the whole process, but I did complete that process, which is that initial, uh, comfort of being part of this larger entity and plugging all the functions into the right, um, their sort of say their counterparts who will now take charge of them going forward.
Hey, thanks for that. And you've primed me well for the next question. So we're talking about times at HSS, and HSS no doubt had a great culture. However, it was not growing fast enough revenue-wise. Was there something inherently flawed in the culture which nobody wants to talk about? Or looking back now, how could have one brought about some changes in HSS culture to make it a more springy, growth-oriented organization? Let me put it non-diplomatically after all. Did the HR spoil the employees at HSS?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's true. I think, I would give credit for HSS to have achieved what it did with all the things I just described. This was, uh, it was not like any other company which was growing on its own steam, in its own vision, in its own. It had these non-discretionary, constraints which were brought about because of its parents, and that was quite a big thing. I don't know whether even the Sam sees it like this, but I saw it like that. I saw they would have a plan. And then I saw that these other things have to be also accommodated. With all this, just holding on even on any kind of growth was commendable because the entity is growing and you're a bigger base to grow on, and the entity is growing in this strange way in which you are actually, and when you do these kind of things, then there is a whole lot of loss of key people in the companies being acquired because they have their own perceptions of what is their future and stuff like that. Grappling with all this was, had it happened on their own volition in an incremental manner, maybe the top management would have handled it differently. But given the fact it happened like this in a somewhat non-discretionary way, I don't know whether I'm sort of saying the right things, but this is how I saw it. I saw that they were being compelled to do many things, which was not in their original game plan. It was not part of the plan. So that put a lot of stress. I don't think the employees were being so. I mean, people would. I don't know how one can say that. And by the way, these facilities were also trimmed with time. So something which was free became something which was paid, and so on. Like the cafeteria, for instance. So they did make adjustments of that sort also. And with this kind of rapid growth, they had acquired, there was a land which was available for building your own campus. But when you are taken over and the person taking you over doesn't want any construction activity there, they want to dispose of the land. So then you have to grapple with this challenge of operating out of, a dozen buildings which are separated all across Gurgaon, that part of Gurgaon, and then running shuttles. And I mean, it was a logistic challenge, and it's amazing that it was substantially met. There were issues here and there, but substantially met. So I don't agree that there was something inherently wrong with the kind of compensation structure or benefit structure in HR, or something lacking in the top management team. I don't see it that way. I see them as very, very resilient, that they kept rising up to meet whatever was being thrown at them. I mean, I remember once just before Arun passed away, in the evening he had gone to the washroom. I mean, this is a very funny way to describe the story, but Manas Tiwari was next to him, and Manas Tiwari has this habit of talking to people who are in the adjacent cubicle, even in the washroom. So he started talking to him, and then Manas comes and tells me that, Arun is in terrible stress and he's not feeling well. I said, how do you know that? He said, no, I spoke to him. I said, where did you speak to him? He told me. I said, I mean, I was surprised. But anyway, so he was under tremendous stress to carry out structural changes or whatever, to meet the new requirements of the new owners. And I think absorbing all that, and of course, he never came back after that last visit to the US, so we don't know what his thoughts were on this. But I mean, it was a lot of stress for all these people, all of them. So it's full credit to them for coping with it as they did. At least that's how I see it.
So in 2008, you decided to leave HSS, which was Arisen by that time. So please tell us frankly if that was a voluntary decision. And either way, please tell us about the circumstances towards that build-up, which prevented you to complete a decade at HSS Flextronics Arisen.
So, it's interesting that I'm talking about this. If this had happened a few years back, I would have probably narrated it differently. But at this stage, I think I might as well tell you the truth, and I will. So it was not the company I had joined. See, Arun had gone, Vinod had gone before that, and Mao had also left. See, when I left, these three people had gone. Adesh was there. He was the only surviving link. And people who had joined after me, much after me, had also gone. That Jairam had left too. So it was not, didn't feel the kind of bond which I had over the years. So it wasn't fair to say that I left HSS or even FSS. I left a company, yes, but it wasn't the company I had joined. That's one thing. Secondly, I have always been driven a lot by circumstances beyond my control in terms of illnesses and so on. And I had my father who was been with me, who lived on with me for 20 years, but he was now tapering off after a series of strokes. He was paralyzed on one side of his body, and crises would come much more frequently than before, which meant rushing off here and there, and it was a big distraction. And as the company was, growing, there was more travel, there was more more mind space required than before. So there was some stress on this front. But this, as you know, there's no one thing which triggers something like this. So there were the other things. So it's not the company I was part of. There were stresses which required me to have more flexibility with my time. And then the new management was quite different from whatever I had been used to. And I have been somewhat emotional in making my decisions, throughout life. And so there are a number of things. I'll give you three or four small things. So there was this room which Arun used to sit in when he was there. And after he passed away, the room was left unused. So I don't think anybody wanted to sit there, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Rooms should be used by people, but that is how it was. And I sort of like that. I thought somebody appropriate should sit there, somebody who probably takes over the company and is the, MD or whatever. And then I find that when the private equity players took over, they had a small consulting arm which they used to attach to any company they acquired to look for opportunities for improvement, to make out certain efficiencies and so on. So this very young boy was sent across. I forget his name now, and he was given that office, and I found that very odd. I found it odd. It was somewhat insensitive. It was like color blindness, right? Or if it was deliberate, it was not a good thing. If it was not deliberate, it was color blindness of an extreme sort. I didn't like that idea, and my room was just next to it. So I mean, nothing wrong with the person. Maybe he didn't have a say in this. I found that very irritating. Okay. Then, when Mao had left, he had not really physically left the premises. He was serving out his notice period or whatever, And he used to be in his room pretty much by himself. I mean, he must be doing something, but he wasn't. He had stopped attending meetings and so on. It was the new CEO designate who was doing all that. One day, I once in a while I used to go and meet him just to chat. And one day when I was going from my room to his, I saw him coming out of the washroom to go to his room. So he was about 20, 30 feet ahead of me, So when I turned, he had already was halfway. And I saw people having teacups in their tea containers in their hand, those paper cups, in the passage, leaning in funny ways, talking to each other, holding out the glass with the legs stretched. And he walked through them, avoiding their legs and so on. None of them interrupted their conversation. None of them even withdrew to make space for him, leave alone greet him, or even nod an acknowledgement of his presence. It was as if he didn't exist there for them. Now, I don't think he noticed it. He's too good a guy to even give it importance. I don't think he would even remember this. I'm sure he doesn't remember this. I'm 200% sure. But I remember it very vividly. I remember seeing this, and I remember coming back home and telling my wife that this is too much. How can people just, in a matter of days, 10 days or whatever it was, I mean, go from A to B, 0 to 1. And I think this is not a place which is what it used to be. And these are the same people. Many of them are the same people. I mean, I don't want to take names, but they were there. So that was a point. These are all irritants, right? And then I had got my increment, and I was called by the new head of the institution, and he was having his lunch. He was eating a burger, and then I came in. He had called me, so I came in, and while eating the burger, he searched with one hand. He removed the pages. He found a paper, and he threw it at me across the table. This is your increment. Go through it. I said, is it okay? Fine. Yeah. And he nodded, and I mean, nothing wrong. I mean, he was, Americans have their own way of, combining work and other interactions. But I found that I think maybe I was just older. That's one of the things. If I was a younger person, I would have probably not even bothered about it. But I mean, so there was this series of these kind of things happening. Plus, there was a thing at home, and so after this particular incident, I decided to, put in my papers. I didn't have anything in hand, but that's okay. Unfortunately, I don't have a good thing in English for it, but there is a thing in Hindi. Do you follow Hindi? You follow Hindi properly? Went to school? Okay, so there
Yes.
is thing about आवत हिय हर्षे नहीं नैनन नहीं सने tulsi तहा न जाइए कंचन बरसे में. I mean, if people are not happy to see you, there is no affection, don't go there even if it is raining gold. That is the crude summary, crude translation of that doha. So I thought my time is up there, and I sort of resigned, and here I am. You know, and after that, actually, things I hadn't have. It's a bit like SRI. I resigned before I got a job, and here also I didn't have anything clear, and had some vague thoughts about some maybe non-profit activities, which some people I knew were doing. Anyway, Deep Joshi, as you know, my first boss was a very big name in non-profits. He was a Magsaysay Award winner, and so whatever. So I came back, and there's a friend of mine, a batchmate from IIM Bangalore, he's an independent consultant operating in this region. He focuses on family businesses. So he told me, why don't you have a look at, this is a very different world. And I had a look at that, and I got engaged with some of them. And that's how it went after that. I became an advisor and a consultant of sorts for the last, whatever, 16 years, till recently when I have sort of disengaged. Uh, that's what I've been doing. 30 plus companies ranging from dairies to automotive to seeds to fertilizer to, real estate. I mean, textiles. Have had a wonderful exposure to a whole lot of industries in the brick and mortar, and a couple of small software startups too, but by and large, brick and mortar. A distillery, wonderful. That's a totally new experience. So I have had a wonderful learning journey after leaving HSS, or rather Arison. So whatever happens, there is, as somebody says, you one door gets closed, another opens, or every door which opens is an exit from somewhere, an entry into somewhere. You know. So yeah, that's how it happened. That's how the change happened, and I don't regret it at all. I would, and I haven't told this to anybody in this way, and I'm telling you, and that too on record. And I think it's partly because of the stage of life. I couldn't care less now. This is the truth.
But seriously, Gautam, आपने आंखें छलका दी होंगी बहुत लोगों की. So, how do I say thanks for sharing this? But it's very painful, the things that you described. But I have to muster courage to ask you this: that how are you so good at communication? How do you have so much knowledge? How are you so popular amongst your colleagues? Can you give us some tips so that we can also become somewhat like you?
I I don't know why you asking me this question, but before this, I tell you this. There's another funny thing which I forgot to tell you, which is actually amusing. So I don't know how it slipped my mind. Actually, I should have prepared for it. I should have written a script. That's another one of those things. Anyway, so when I was hired by HSS, they said in the form I had to give some references, and they wanted references from every job I had held. So I gave that, and that included the very first job, which was this Deep Joshi was who had, as I told you, I keep saying again and again, I'm very proud of it. He won the Magsaysay Award, and that was in '79. He was my boss. So I've mentioned his name. Then I get a call from Deep. He says, "What is this?" He says, you're not in touch with me. You don't look me up. You don't talk to me, and you put my name there, and somebody rings me up and asks about you. You know." So I really apologized to him, and I said, since you became such a big guy, I don't want to take your time and also. But what I was surprised was that Rajesh Pandey, who was the hiring person, he actually did a reference check in '96 with my boss in '79. I mean, it was both impressive and worrying. So I asked him later, you did it only for me, or you did do it for everybody? Somebody, he says, well, I will do it for everybody. You just happen to be an older person, so we had to go that far back in time. you know, it was quite embarrassing, to get a call from your boss. He says, you never looked me up, and now you have somebody, third party is ringing me and asking about you. You should have at least told me. I said, I never knew that they'll go that far back in time. Yeah. 96. Sorry, 98 it was, or not 96. Was it 90? 98. 98 is doing a reference check for 79. Just imagine. So anyway, so you were saying something about what do I do for what?
How do we
Oh, okay.
become like you?
Why do people like me? Oh, because I'm mostly non-serious. So I think people like that little, interlude of comic relief. But yeah, I mean, I don't know about that part. I'll take it as a compliment. But I have been a very curious person, So I'm always looking at uh, that shows up in my only habit, which is a very sedentary one, which is reading. That's the only thing I really do. Of course, nowadays there are some other things which take my time. There is cryptic crossword. People say it keeps you, keeps Alzheimer at bay. And also, I do more traveling than I've ever done before. I this year, for example, just over, I think I had lots of travel, lots of travel. I have my freedom in that sense, and my grandchildren take my. I mean, I look forward to talking to them. That's another huge uh, benefit of age, which I wouldn't trade for anything. So I don't have any tips for people. I just have if I had to sort of give some tips to young people, I would say be curious. Curiosity is very useful because don't know what you'll pick up from where. I think it's that's why I like to read the newspaper in print, because if you read online, you are guided towards the kind of content you already read in the past. So you're shown more and more of that, and you also become focused. Like if you're sports, you go to the sports section, you read the sports, get out. If you have a newspaper, you see things which you did not plan to see. You have this unexpected something happening in a half column here or half column there. I've found some wonderful things just today. For example, I don't know whether I shared it with, but there's a news item which says that since Jammu and Kashmir from being a state became a UT, a union territory, there was some kind of a big effort within the departments to remove the word state and put UT there. And this huge mammoth exercise must have been subcontracted down to the lowest level. And so you had this funny thing, in textbooks, the state of the body became UT of the body, you know. So, so unintended consequences of blind replacement, which is fascinating, which says a lot about how these things are organized. Is it of use anywhere? Maybe, but I would never have seen it if I had not read the paper, if I had just read it online. So I think curiosity is one big thing. The other thing, of course, I don't know how much one can do is to, and as I said again and again, I'm repeating it. I've had a charmed life. I have never ever worked in a place where I did not have very bright people around me. In BL, I can pick up any colleague and I can talk about him or her for a length of time. Extremely bright people, very good in their subject, and many of them were very patient. For example, when I first took over R&D in equipment, I didn't know much about sheet metal. I mean, I had a more like an electronics kind of a thing. I didn't know about the mechanical processes that well. You do only one term of it in engineering college, and or maybe two terms of drawing and stuff. So I had very patient colleagues who explained everything to me, and I'm so thankful. Similarly, in HSS, of course, there was it was I have to strain to think of anybody. So I think you surround yourself with people who are bright and you are curious, and everything else falls in place. And for if you are a man, then my biggest tip is, however funny it sounds, find a lady smarter than you, successful, and better in every way, and somehow get to marry her. And that's it. Life takes care of itself. You suddenly get freedom to do many things. That is what it is. But if you, on a more serious note, since I have to act my age as well at times, so Philip Crosby, this consultant, the writer, educationist consultant with whom I was associated in IQL, he was a bit like Hemingway or George Orwell, very sparse in his prose, very compact. So he said, the only thing one should aspire to be, and everything else will follow, is useful and reliable. What do you want to be? I want to be useful and reliable. And then the forces around you will, make sure that you get to do things. I'm sorry, this is too much of gyan. So I'll stop here.
I think it's pearls of wisdom coming from you, and that's precious. But please do tell us something about the very you. What songs and movies you like? Do you watch reels? Do you like to drive fast cars? I dare say. What do you do love? What do you love doing outside work? And above all, do you plan to write an autobiography, which I'm sure would become an instant bestseller?
And it will not become a stress. I don't plan to do that. I have very sedentary habits, and I just like to read, which is again a bit of a challenge during the COVID period. Somehow one got used to consuming content online, and I'm trying hard to break out of that habit because that's not a. It's a very. It's not a speedy process. So watching a video takes much more time than reading the transcript. So I somehow over time I have been sucked into this watching content trap, and I'm trying to break out of that. My habits are very simple. I like to read. I have a big collection, which I'm trying to trim unsuccessfully. And I'm very fond of the Hindi film music of the 60s and before that. And I was a big film buff till some time back. Um, I and I have a this fondness shows in recall. So somebody asked me, for 8 years you were a schoolboy in Dehradun in 1963 to 71, 64, whatever. So I was really proud that I could actually recall all the movies I had seen in that period, including the halls where I saw them, and the list ran into some 200 plus. So I was a big movie buff, and I think that is one thing. And music, I remember I bunked school to go and try and meet the Beatles when they came to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's ashram in Rishikesh. I even learned, around that same time that Sri Ravi Shankar was there at their ashram. He was also a student of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, but of course I didn't know him. I also learned the transcendental meditation which Mahesh Yogi used to teach. I had an ulterior motive also, thinking that I may run into. So I didn't meet the Beatles, obviously not. They were kept in a different part. But I did meet Mia Farrow. I took an autograph of that actress, and Paul Donovan, the singer, I took his autograph too. So some benefit of hanging around there. So I have a diverse set of interests. But since you asked about music, it's Hindi film music and it's books. That's it. It's very boring actually. There's nothing exciting. Fast cars. I drive a small old car, and that too very sedately.
It was a privilege talking to you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have been, thanks for watching. We were being regaled and tutored by the sagacious management consultant from BizMentor Consultancy Services Private Limited, the wonderful Gautam Brahma.
Thank you, Prashant. The pleasure was entirely mine. And I look forward to seeing more of your interviews.
Thank you, sir.